Davey again. I hope you're doing great today. So, last video I talked about the compose function. It's part of this series where I covered composition technique in functional programming using JavaScript in our case, actually to be more precise, using Typescript. And what I did in the previous video that was quite not okay actually is the fact that when I covered I build a compose function, I type it with function right here. And you watching me, you should have been like, come on, Davey, you can do better than that. And you'll be right. And you will be completely right. I just wanted to keep the video super short, so then we can quickly move on to the essential of the heart of the concept, right? So composition, especially compose function in our case, it's about taking two multiple functions, passing them as argument and making sure that the input of so we start initially with an input that we give to the first function, and that function executes. The output of that function becomes the input of the next function, right? And that's what we wrote right here. So we have f and j, and then j takes x as an argument right here. And then this one there will then be passed to f. And now we have two challenges we're going to cover right here. The first one is, let's clean up the type, right? The type system, because this is completely wrong. You don't do function. So the first thing I have in mind here is, okay, what is actually function? If you look at it right here, you see that it is it takes an argument, one argument. So j, for example, takes one argument, and apparently f also takes one argument. What is that argument? That argument is x. We said unknown in the previous video, but actually that we don't know really. So what I'm going to do is to start by giving it a generic. So what do we do with the generic? It gives us the possibility to type it in a certain way that we give hands to the person using it to define whatever they want to put in there. There's some constraint when you use generic that way, because then you're saying that the input and the output should always be from the same type, right? So but there are ways from a Typescript perspective to make sure that you get some flexibility in that way, right? So now function. What about function really? So function is the equivalent of writing any. let me make sure that it's the equivalent of writing any. So on the screen in my previous video, you should have seen 15 euro price tag showing, because each of the functions is 5 euro that you put in a bucket and you give it to a charity somewhere. It should do that if you have any 5 euros, functions 5 euros in your code base. You count each of them and you pay tax for that. Okay, I'm kidding right here, because sometimes you need that any, but I've never seen a case where I really need function this way, right? Because there's a much smarter way to define function. So let's solve it here. So function, based on what we know now, we're going to say that function takes something of type x, an argument x, and then return t. So that function there is the same that will go over here and then here as well. So instead of repeating ourselves each time and writing it in line, what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut that from here, define a type right here, and then pass this one here. And that one there is generic. So what I'm going to do is just to mark it as generic. I could use t here, but yeah, that will be too easy. So what I'm going to do is use something like w, so you understand that generic could literally be could be called the way you want. And now here I can just pass it as t, right? And do exactly the same thing like this over here. Put it here, and then same thing here of type t. Okay, so now we see that this is still working pretty well, and we actually fixed the first issue in terms of typing, right? So typing is important. You got to make sure that it works really well, and that's basically what we did right now. So the second step is to say, how about the fact that compose right here is only handling 2 functions at a time? Well, what happens if we want a third one? So let's take an example. Here we're going to have something called lowercase, right? And we're gonna make sure that whenever we call that, lowercase is being called over there. And then we're gonna pass that lowercase right here, right? So now we see that lowercase isn't called because it's a third argument, and JavaScript expect 2 arguments. That function does expect 2 arguments and only takes into account the first 2 arguments you pass, not the third one. So how are we going to write that in here so that the compose function contains indeed a way to handle this third function? So here, what we're going to do first is to make sure that we don't have a limit in terms of the number of arguments that we're going to receive. So here I remove everything, and I'm just gonna say I don't know how many of them, but I hope that whenever regardless of the number of arguments you pass, they're gonna all be returned as an array using the spread operator with the 3 dots. What are the type? Well, type is pretty easy right here. You can basically say this one is going to be an array. We know that it's an array, but an array of what, really? An array of fn. Here you have it like this. It's already defined up there, right? So that's gonna be an array of fn here. If the name fns here doesn't really make sense to you, think of it this way. I like to call function, just shorten them as fn. So fns is functions, right? You can think of it this way, but I'm gonna keep it short like this. So what happened now? We know that the return is still going to be something of type fn, so this is pretty good. The input is this, yeah, really good. How about the output right here? So in terms of the output, we have an array. So how can we make sure that in that array every single function is being called, and when they're called, they're passed to the previous they get passed to the previous one, right? So the way you're going to do that is introducing this idea of reduce. So with reduce, you're going to have the previous, let's call that the previous function, and the current function, all right? And what you're going to do with the previous and the current, if you remember the way it was before, we were calling something like fn, and then we passed the x. So you got to think of that's the way we were calling it, really. And so you got to think of J right there. It's like the previous one, and then it's gonna pass that to the current one, and then you cycle back, and then from there you just need to pass the initial value, which is x, which gonna be x in our case. So what is it? What is the previous one? So you just pass the current, and that one is going to receive the previous function right there, right? So if you see that, oh, it's probably outside of the screen, so let me make sure that you see it really well here. If you see that implementation, you gotta quickly see, well, we're just calling a reduce, and we're looping through each of the function, and then what we do is the current function, which is the next one in line, takes as argument the previous one, but it's going to be called at some point by having the initial value to be that argument. And look at below, it's working. It is actually working really well, and you can test it with let's say, for example, we want to add underscore between the things here. So it's like add underscore between them. So you're going to say for each of them, we're just going to replace, for example, replace all, and we're going to say for each space we're just gonna put underscore right there. So if we do so, now we can come here and then say add underscore, and we see right away that our thing is working really well. So we can keep on adding functions in our compose, and they will just get executed one after the other. Is that clear? Do you see the benefit of using it? So I'm going to make sure that in one of the videos still this week, I'm going to take an example in a React project, but it doesn't matter React or Angular, as just an example where you can leverage that composition. And composition is much better than passing hardcore function, like literally having them inside the function, right? So that's it for today. I'll see you on the next video. Cheers, people.